Thank you. All right. A warm welcome to everyone joining us today for session number 7, titled, the Africa Climate and Health Responder course. So we're already in session number 7. We're looking at climate extreme, agriculture, and food security. Again, a warm welcome to everyone joining us from wherever we are joining from. We are glad that you made time to be with us today. So I wish to just alert us that we have simultaneous translation, which is available in English, French, and Portuguese, using the button with the globe icon as shown here under. So kindly, we request that you just go to that icon with the globe, kindly choose the translation that you're comfortable with, and you'd be able to engage with the discussions per your language. So this is part of an 11, this is session 7 of an 11 course program, or 11 session course, which happens every Tuesday and Thursday. Again, this is session number 7 of an 11 session course that is happening every Tuesday and Thursday. So session 7, which is happening today, 8th of October, 2024, is looking at climate extremes, agriculture, and food security. So that's what we're looking at. Session 8, of course, will be coming up on October 10th, and that will be looking at climate change, mental health, and forced migration. And we hope that you'd be able to make time to join that session as well. Again, thank you for making time, for joining today's session, and we're really looking forward to having an amazing interactive session today. Sorry. All right, so this is going to be a 90-minute session. The sessions always end with a Q&A section, so we shall have a Q&A session after today's section. Kindly, we request that you enter your questions for the presenter's attention in the Q&A function. Kindly utilize the Q&A function to enter your questions for the presenter's attention. And when we get to the Q&A section, then we will be able to have the presenters respond appropriately to the questions that you will have raised. The sessions are being recorded. We are having video recordings for these sessions. The slide decks and the resources, together with the video recordings, will be made available on the course website. Again, this session is being recorded, and all sessions are being recorded. And together with the slide decks and the resources, all that are going to be made available for you on the course website. So after this particular session, then you can be able to go ahead and interact with the materials once again to just refresh yourselves. So the objectives for today's session, again, session 7, climate extremes, agriculture, and food security. The objectives we have are: 1, we want to describe how extremes of temperature and precipitation are affecting food security and malnutrition in the African continent. 2, we are looking at exploring mechanisms for forecasting food insecurity using climate models. 3, we are looking at exploring examples of strategies to improve food security in a changing climate. And 4, we want to discuss relationships between food, animal, and plant agriculture, and greenhouse gas emissions, including methane and carbon, and the core benefits of improved diets to address malnutrition and mitigate climate change. I think we are all in agreement that this is a topic of interest for us in the African continent, because we do know that the climate extremes and climate change and the impacts thereof affect the most vulnerable in society and the most vulnerable in community. And unfortunately, majority of these are in the African continent. And so this is a topic that is of interest to us. And once again, we are glad that you made time to join us, and we are looking forward to an interactive session today. So these are our speakers. These are our presenters. We have a great panel lined up for you today. And we have Beatrice Ekesa-Onyango. She's a PhD. She holds a PhD and is a senior nutrition and agriculture food system specialist and international researcher from Kenya. She has over 16 years experience working with international research organizations where she leads research for development, interventions in Africa and the Pacific. Her work has mainly been on the nexus of agrobiodiversity, dietary diversity, and nutrition outcomes. In her work, Dr. Ekesa keeps a keen eye on aspects such as climate change, social and gender dynamics. Social and gender dynamics. Dr. Ekesa has served as a keynote speaker, key presenter, and panelist in several global forums where she has had opportunities to share her experience on how climate change and agrobiodiversity influence food and nutrition security. We're truly honored to have you, Dr. Beatrice, and we're really looking forward to engaging with you. She is proud to have been the lead scientist in the work on participatory evaluation and introduction of vitamin A-rich banana varieties in agri-food systems for East and Central Africa. So members, we are in safe hands with Dr. Beatrice, and we're really looking forward to listening to her presentation. We also have Guigma. Guigma is a climate scientist with expertise in climate risk, anticipatory action, and the climate and conflict nexus, in addition to profound research interest in heat waves. Our focal point for West Africa and the Sahel, he is a focal point for West Africa and the Sahel, and he has vast experience working with national meteorological and hydrological services. Once again, we're truly honored and delighted to have Guigma with us, and we're looking forward to tap into his expertise and wisdom. Finally, and not in any way the least, we have John Otieno, who's the regional advocacy officer for action against hunger in the Horn of Africa, East and Southern Africa. John Otieno is a perceptive researcher, policy advocacy, and evidence-based advocate who is a tenacious champion. He has more than 14 years of practical experience working in the Horn and East Africa in development and humanitarian contexts. In addition to fostering positive change and life-saving action in sub-Saharan Africa, his work includes working experience in climate, fragile, and conflict-affected contexts, and bridging the gaps between policy, advocacy, influence, program delivery, research, and decision-making. At the moment, he is in charge of overseeing action against hunger's regional advocacy efforts for the nations of East and Horn of Africa, which include Somalia, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Kenya, and Haiti. In order to accomplish advocacy goals, he encourages attempts to shape practices and policies and cultivates connections with governments and decision makers. He is in charge of the creation and execution of all regional country-based advocacy strategies, ensuring engagement and coordination with all departments and project teams. He is a certified PMD Pro, TOT on budget and policy analysis, qualitative and quantitative research, and is a strong proponent for youth empowerment in advocacy and accountability as change drivers. John, we are glad to have you on board, and we look forward to tapping into your wisdom as well. So members, these are our presenters today that we wish to invite to speak to us this evening or this afternoon or this morning, depending on where we are joining from. I just want to say thank you at this point in time. We will be sharing this QR code at the end of today's session so that then we can be able to get your feedback. So without further ado, members, we want to give an indication that today's session flow will, of course, as has been the norm, we'll be having our 40 minutes presentation from our key speaker. This is Dr. Beatrice Ekesa-Onyango, and thereafter we will proceed swiftly to a 10 minutes case study presentation by Guigma and another 10 minutes case study presentation from John. And then thereafter, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. And so without further ado, it is my humble pleasure to invite Dr. Beatrice to take the floor and speak to us. Dr. Beatrice, go ahead. You can share your screen and move forward with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I hope you can hear me.
We can, loud and clear.
Great. And thank you so much, the conference, the training organizers. Yeah, I'm really honored to be here, and I would like to share what I have been learning and doing and all the experiences we've had in the field of climate extremes, agriculture, and food security. So at least I'll not talk about myself. I think that has been done so well by some. Yeah, so climate change and the extremities that come with these are not new things, are things that we are all witnessing in where we sit or where we stay. And so there's a lot that needs to be done. But before I go deep into my presentation, I'm really going to look at two aspects of the objectives that were talked about. I would like really to look at how climate change and agrobiodiversity is actually influencing malnutrition, and then trying to look at some of the few strategies that have actually been put in place to try to solve this key problem of climate change and its consequences. I also didn't want to assume that we are all aware of the key terms around this. So I want to spend a minute or two to just talk about some of the key terms that you might hear about in my presentation. So I'll still reinforce what climate change is. This is the long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns. And then when you talk about climate extremities, what are we talking about? These are the long-term patterns of weather that cause abnormal magnitude and frequencies of occurrences such as heat waves, cold waves, heat precipitation, flooding, and storms, just to mention a few. So sometimes you can find the temperatures go high, but there are levels when they get there and the duration they stay, it becomes very, very abnormal and it becomes a big issue. So these are the things that you're talking about when you talk of extremities. Then climate vulnerability. When I'll talk about climate vulnerability, I'm talking about the degree to which a system or an individual is susceptible to and unable to cope with adverse effects of climate change, including climate variation and climate extremes. And then we have agrobiodiversity, which is something that I have been working so much on. Agrobiodiversity means the variety and variability of animals, plants, and microorganisms that are necessary for sustaining key functions of our agro-ecosystem to support food production and food security. So it involves all the animals, all the plants, even things like pollinators, things like fungi that end up contributing and making sure that we can have the food that we need to have for us to function properly. Then food security. This is when all individuals have reliable access to sufficient quantities of affordable, nutritious food to lead a healthy life. It's not just only affordable, there are almost 4 components, and my colleagues might mention that. Safety, it's also part of food security. So that is why when you talk about climate extremities, agriculture, and food security, you're not just looking at the quantities, the qualities, the safetiness, the nutrition value, and things like that. And then this food has to be there on a regular basis so as to be able to perform the function that it is supposed to perform. Then nutrition. Nutrition is the interaction between the food and the body. So if you eat food and then it doesn't meet its purpose, then you find that the food has not really performed its nutritional purpose. Then malnutrition. So malnutrition is the deficiency or excess in intake of nutrients, imbalance, essential for nutrients or impaired use of nutrients. So when we find someone who is overweight or obesity, they are still having malnutrition. If you find someone who seems to be underweight or malnourished, or rather someone who seems to have less weight for their age or for their height, or less weight for their age, or they have less height for their age, they are all malnourished. So we have all the extremes. And then you also have the malnutrition that is not just about excess or inadequate, but due to non-communicable cases. For instance, if you're having something like diabetes, you find that can also be a result of poor nutrition. So these are some of the key terms that I wanted us to have in mind as we move towards this presentation. So when we talk about climate extremities, you find Africa finds itself in the middle of all these problems. We have a lot of documentation that clearly indicates that Africa could be the least contributor to climate change. But then despite that, Africa is the most affected with the consequences that are arising because of climate change. So I just wanted to share this diagram. And what you can see is that as you move from green to yellow to orange until red, you're moving towards the regions that are most at risk. So look at other parts of the world. They seem to have a lot of green as per now. But then if you look at Africa, there's yellow, orange, and dark red, meaning that we are the most at risk when it talks of climate change. But then why is it that this is the case? So why Africa is really greatly at risk and suffering the greatest consequence and likely to even suffer more of this is because we have a strong livelihoods dependent on things that are really related to climate change. The 95% of rain-fed agriculture worldwide is actually in Africa. The fact that we depend on agriculture for food, for livelihoods, for economic growth and things like that puts Africa at a very, very vulnerable state. And climate change, as we all know, is directly related to agriculture. It influences the water, it influences the soil, it influences the atmosphere, it influences most of the things that really contribute to agriculture. So anything happening to climate change, regardless of where the cause is or who is causing this, we end up being the ones that bear the highest cost. It is because we have a strong dependent on rain-fed agriculture for all the things that we need, economically, for nutrition, and things like that. The other thing that puts Africa at risk is the high level of poverty and illiteracy. Why poverty? You find because sometimes you're not able to afford the necessities of life. You are therefore not able to practice the actions that would help you contribute to climate mitigation or adaptation. We can't afford gas, a good number of people in Africa. We still end up using charcoal as our source of energy, especially if you want to cook or do anything like that. You still end up using firewood as your source of energy. So this puts the population and the community and the different countries at a very, very difficult position, as much as it is known that cutting the trees is really contributing to climate change, but then people still cannot do without the charcoal, people still cannot do without the firewood. So you find it becomes very, very hard to really optimally practice activities or interventions that cause mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Then illiteracy. We know there are places where the levels of illiteracy are still very, very high within Africa. We've had a lot of effort in this. A number of people have got to be literate, but we still have a great proportion of our population that is still illiterate. Meaning that it takes a lot of resources and a lot of effort to make sure that everyone can really understand and even just get the information that would enable them to take part effectively in actions that would prevent, mitigate, and even cause better adaptation to climate change. Thirdly, we have weak economic structures and institutions, and poorly developed government structures. There's a lot of effort on this, we can't deny, and different countries are at different levels. But then the weak economies are the ones that are contributing to poverty. The poor government structures end up creating opportunities for things like corruption. So you find that the resources that we have don't end up getting to where they are, and then you don't end up really performing our best in some of these ventures that will really support this process. So these are some of the things that puts Africa in a very difficult situation when it comes to climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and even reducing these risks. I also wanted to share other things that are really emerging from climate change. We talked about it being caused by weather, prolonged changes in weather patterns. But then I also wanted to mention how these affect several aspects of our livelihoods in Africa. So some of the things that emerge from climate extremities, I said, we have floods, storms, we can even have landslide, droughts, wildfires. In just 2023, about 80 events were reported of all this. And what we saw is that more than half of them were related to floods. And when I mention floods, there are different kinds of floods. We've had floods where we call them pluvial floods, where the rain is too much. It is not such that the drainage systems and any other structures that are supposed to be absorbing water cannot stand that depth. That's why you find when it rains so much, some areas get a lot of water, and these end up interfering with a lot of functional systems within that particular community. We also have flooding that comes just because of the water being too much for the soil to absorb. Then we have flooding that occurs in the river banks. Communities living close to river because of the rising water levels, they end up having a lot of flooding around that area. And then the other flooding can also occur in the ocean banks. People who are bordering the seas and the oceans, the rising sea levels cause a lot of flooding. This ends up spoiling production that could be along the coast or on the river banks. It ends up spoiling livelihoods. People have things that are using for economic purposes. And you find with all these, you end up losing this. These are the source of income, the source of food that end up actually contributing to what someone brings on the table and eats in the long run. Deaths. More than 5,000 deaths were just reported in 2023 due to climate-related events. Majority of them were from drought, and a good proportion of them was still from floods. And those of us who come from East Africa, it was early this year when we had a lot of water affecting a lot of functions in so many cities, in so many peripheral areas. And you find that it's caused death, it caused destruction of production input, it caused destruction of poverty. And you find property people end up not having enough resources or even enough food directly to meet their daily livelihood needs. When you look at the number of people affected, more than 110 million in Africa. And the great effect was really from drought. And then lastly, economic effect. You find the climate has a lot of effect on our economic damage. It destroys livelihoods in terms of fisheries, people doing fisheries, production, people producing land, crops within the areas that end up affected by these, and so many things that end up spoiling our economic well-being. And when all this happens, we either miss to have what we need directly as food or money to be able to obtain what we can buy to make sure we have the right food. In addition to that, I've mentioned the aspects of climate change. I also told you about agrobiodiversity. I wanted to highlight the link so that by the time we are done with this lecture, we understand how these different factors are actually linked to each other and how they end up contributing to food and nutrition security. This is a diagrammatic representation that I published last year. When I presented it somewhere, and then we were able to put it online. So you can be able to access it, but I'm going to spend a few minutes to just go through it. So what I want to first say is that climate change and agrobiodiversity loss have a vicious cycle. When we are cutting down our trees, when you are reducing the number of species that are out there, either on land or on water, we end up weakening up the system. And when the system is weakened, When you have things like flooding or water, then the system is not able to withstand. Or invasive species, you find the system is not able to withstand that. Then the adversities of climate change become even more. On the other hand, as climate change becomes more advanced, because of the flooding, the temperature, the precipitation, and things like that, some species are not able to survive particular temperatures or the waterlogged areas or the, just the things that bring that you find some species, either animals or plants, are not able to survive that. So you find it ends up leading to extinction or loss of a number of species. So when you talk about climate change and agrobiodiversity loss, these are things that end up contributing to each other. So when we are tackling climate change, it means that we also have to also tackle agrobiodiversity at the same time. So when we have all this climate change and agrobiodiversity loss happening, there are key things that I wanted to mention that end up resulting. Altered food production in terms of quality and quantity. Altered and weakened ecosystems. When you have diverse crops together in one particular farming system, you find that they are able to respond to risks in terms of diseases and things like that differently. Some of them will be stronger and they can survive. Some of them will not be able to survive. So, but if you have diversity, it means that if you're losing something, you're not losing everything. And other speakers might mention that. Reduced water quality. Because of climate change, you find you end up having a lot of water that is either disappearing because of the loss in a tree cover that ends up enhancing water tables. You find even the quality of the water that is there is not of the best quality, because sometimes we have the water being polluted by some of the gases that could be out there. And then this ends up making sure that things that need water to perform, for instance, crops, are not able to get what they need for optimal production. Then increase in temperature and changes in precipitation. We've had a lot of cases where the temperatures are higher than they've never been. In some places, it's getting very, very cold. And you find things like even precipitation influence pollination and pollinators, such that you find that in some cases, the bees are out, but then the plants have not yet bloomed because of the mismatch. So you find they're not able to really align in that connection and cause flowering and thus production. So you end up having just the temperature changes and the precipitation influencing yield in production. Then, as we've mentioned, abnormal water patterns. Then what does this result to? First of all, we have consumption of poor diets, because you cannot access the diversity that you need. And sometimes because of the limitation in what is there, whatever is available becomes very, very pricey. And so the vulnerable communities cannot afford as much as they need. Then increased frequency and vulnerability to existing diseases. I said when crops and plants are not well diversified, their vulnerability is even more. Then we also have emergence of new pests, diseases, and invasive species. I'll mention these later, but we've had species that are now appearing that were never a threat, and they're becoming a big problem to our production systems. And then forced and voluntary displacement and migration. When you've had your land where you've lived for so many years, but then now because of flooding, you cannot live there. You're leaving your land, you're leaving your crops that you could have cultivated, you're moving somewhere else to be displaced. It means that you're losing a lot of your livelihood, and this is going to greatly influence your food and nutrition security. Then this finally results into undernutrition, overweight, or physical and mental health problems. Why? Because we're not accessing the diets that we want to access. So that is the nexus that I want us to be very, very clear about. Then what are some of the documented consequences of climate extremities and the effect on food security. For those of us who've lived in Africa, we remember the 2019-2020 swarm of locust invasion in most of African countries, especially Eastern Africa. This destroyed 170,000 acres of crops, affecting 54 million people in Eastern Africa. And around 30 million of them actually were at the verge of malnutrition, or rather severe malnutrition. In 2017, as from 2017, and these has still been happening in a number of countries for a few years ago, we had the fall armyworm that destroyed farmers' crops, especially the maize, sorghum, and wheat, leading to 58% yield loss. And the economic loss was about $9.4 billion. This was mostly affecting Southeast and West Africa. Then we've also had cases of water hyacinths. This is not just in the Lake Victoria, but I know there are lakes in other countries that have also had this. Ethiopia, I know we've had that in, is it Lake Tana or something? So water hyacinth has affected fishing. It has also affected farming that happens along the lake, and even tourism. And you find that these are economic activities that contribute directly to food and indirectly to also food. Then flooding. Flooding and storms have left millions of families in Africa without a harvest and a livelihood. And then we can't forget to talk about droughts. In 2023 alone, 40 million people in East Africa were affected, and many of them were facing near famine and malnutrition. And as I mentioned before, the warmer temperatures and precipitations have affected timings of blooming and pollinators coming out. So you find there's a mismatch. And when pollination is not happening optimally, then production and agricultural yield is greatly released. I don't know whether you can see these pictures. Here is just a picture of some of taken during when we had the locust invasion. This is the armyworm. This is the flooding. We have also water hyacinth, and we have drought that really ends up killing a lot of livestock that are a key livelihood of a big proportion of African communities. Just continuing to talk about the consequences that have been documented. Because of the challenges that are coming with climate change, you find majority of countries are moving towards what is easy. And so we end up focusing on crops that can still have high yield despite their low nutrition level. So you find people are now focusing on rice, wheat, and maize, and leaving alone some of our indigenous crops that were very nutritious. Some of them were drought resistant, some of them were able to to still stay there, whether it was hot, whether it was cold, and things like that. We are moving to things that can still have very, very high yielding. And what has happened is that there has been more focus on intensified agriculture. And 90% of humanity's energy intake is now from just 15 food crops. We know what happens if your dietary diversity is very, very limiting. You end up missing on key nutrients, and thus ending up having poor health status and nutrition status. What has also been observed is that because of this focus on a few crops, that we can really increase the yield and just meet the right quantities of food that we need, global diets have increased in similarity. What you can find in the US, come to Kenya, you'll still find it. What you can find in Asia, you come to another country, Africa, you can still find it. Why? Because there is a lot of cross interaction, and we are borrowing what we think works well. But then in the long run, we are losing some of the few things that we were very, very dear to our food systems, because there is not so much incentive to continue to invest in them. Now there's something that you'd really just wait to eat in your country because you couldn't find it somewhere else. But these days, with a lot of effort and asking around, you can still get to eat what you want to eat regardless of where you are, which shouldn't be the case. We should still have our uniqueness in whatever foods we have, so that there is still diversity in what we eat, because we understand clearly that the more the diverse the foods, the more nutritious we are able to attain, or the more nutrients we are really able to attain. So the idea is that if we are doing intensified agriculture, can we make sure that it is sustainable and it takes care of diversity, so that it does not lead to loss of other food crops that could really be very, very key, especially in the African continent. So I can share this. You find there's been an increase, apart from rice, wheat, and maize, there's a lot of increase in soybean, sunflower, and palm oil into our diets. But then there is significant decrease in food crops like cassava, sweet potato, millet, and sorghums. And I'll mention this later, a number of research organizations that I have worked with have been doing a lot of work in making sure that some of these varieties of sweet potato, millet, sorghum are conserved, or some of the varieties are used to develop cultivars that can be resilient to climate change issues. So we don't want to go there where we'll only have 3 crops or 5 crops that can feed all the magnitude that we have. Then, apart from just the influence and the changes in production, we've had a lot of forums that have been set up to project what could happen to food production with all these climate change risks that are happening. According to a report done in 2014, and I'm starting with 2014 because it is a projection. So it is projected up to 2060. This is a figure that is showing changes in maximum catch potential. Catch potential, talking about fisheries. What is possible to be caught for food in the water bodies. And the red sides means very little, while as you go towards blue means there's still something you can catch, although it ranges from 0 to around 100%. So when you look at Africa, I hope it can be visible around here, you can see that along the East African side, at least we have some blue and light blue. But if you look at the part of North Africa, we have a lot of yellow and red, meaning the maximum catch is decreasing significantly between -6 to -20 to even -50. If you look on the sides of West Africa, we have some red and orange here and a lot of yellow. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is that climate change is already causing a decrease in production from fisheries or from water bodies. And these, of course, will influence food security because we eat both animals, plants from both the water and land. Then when you look at production in terms of crops, in 2010, we can see that increase in yield is not very, very different from decrease in yield. And when you talk about this increase, it's mostly about the few crops that seem to still do well or that have become a focus of the diets, the rice, the wheat, and the maize. So the production is still increasing, while there's a decrease generally in other food crops. But then the idea is that as you move towards 2030, 2050, 2070, 2090, I don't know whether any of us are going to see that, but as you move towards those ends, what is happening is that the proportion of increase in yield is getting low and low and low, while the decrease in yield is very, very high, with a great proportion showing -50 to 100% decrease, meaning there are some crops that will actually not be able to grow in particular areas some years from now. Then I also was able to get from the latest climate change report, and what I was seeing was that This is observed impact and related losses and damages of climate change. And I was to highlight Africa, but it was becoming very difficult, but I hope some of you can be able to see that. So when you look at water availability and food production, 2 dots means medium, 3 dots means high. A blank red box means adverse impact. So for instance, in Africa, physical water availability, there's been an adverse effect on this with moderate levels of reduction. But when you talk about agricultural crop production, there is high or very high level of reduction in terms of agricultural production. Then we can move, this is the same as, so agricultural production is more adverse in terms of destruction and loss. But then livestock, we still have a little bit of it because there's only low loss. But the aquatic, there's already medium, meaning that we are not heading to the right place if things are not taken care of. And then I wanted to also talk about the species, changes in species. In Africa, you see the terrestrial species, there has been very high loss in the terrestrial species. You see the 3 dots. And also the oceanic species, you see there is also very, very high loss in oceanic species, meaning that what was actually being projected is actually happening. This was from the report of last year. So after talking about all that, I would like to now mention what are the strategies and the efforts that are in place. There are many efforts, but I'm going to talk about the few that I have been able to come across during my work. First of all, knowledge development and co-production. We talked about levels of illiteracy and things like that. But there's been a lot of effort in a number of African countries to come up with regional level food composition tables so that our communities can access this information and be able to choose what they can be able to eat from what is available within their environment. Seasonal food calendars have also been developed, and seasonal food calendars are documents that enable community to see what is available within their community in what quantities at what time of the year, just to make sure that we can still be able to maximally or optimally use what is there for us. Then there's also been an effort to develop country-level food-based dietary guidelines. This is just making sure that there's information out there so that people can be able to use this information to meet their food and nutrition security. So country-level food-based dietary guidelines are in Kenya. Ethiopia just released theirs, I think, last year or so. Sierra Leone, Ghana, and they don't have to be food-based dietary guidelines. They can be food guides, just to be able to guide the population on what are the appropriate foods that can be used to meet their nutrition needs and things like that. Then there has been effort in government policies directed towards agrobiodiversity conservation. This has happened in Malawi, Ethiopia, Kenya, and there could be other countries that I might not be aware. But these are just the efforts that are there. There is still a lot that can be done. Then we have had conservation of cultivars. And it's not just about conservation, also improvement of cultivars to make sure that we are able to be aware and we are able to access cultivars that are resilient to climate change and adaptive to climate change. And with this, I'm going to talk about an employer of mine, CJR, where we have more than 12 international gene banks operated worldwide. And in Africa, we have a good number. We have in Nigeria, we have in Ethiopia, we have, in so many countries. And some of these gene banks are storing some of our precious germplasm, so that this is material that can be accessed by our farmers, by our researchers, and by our communities at any time. You can see the number of accessions that are being stored. We have cereals, grains, legumes, forages, tree species, root and tuber crops, and bananas. This is a place to keep these species or germplasm collection so that if at all we are not able to mitigate adequately, and these species cannot be available generally within the community, there is still a place that we can go to and bring back these species and still keep them within our farming and our diet systems. We also have government-owned gene banks in a number of countries within Africa. And these are resources that still need to be tapped more by our farmers and our communities. Apart from just having the gene banks and having the government-led gene banks, there's also been a lot of work by research institutions to set up community seed banks. Modern community seed banks have been reported in Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and countries like that. And what happens with the community seed bank is that in a community, farmers are able to bring in their species that they find very dear to them, very important to them. And these species are put in this community seed bank. During a planting season, the farmers borrow this material. And when they plant, they have to bring back some of the seeds after they have harvested. Most of these species are those that are regenerative. They are not those that you have to buy the seeds for you to grow. So this has been a very sustainable process at community level to make sure they can access diverse seeds of the varieties that they like for their food and nutrition security. Then we've had a lot of capacity building and awareness creation. A number of countries are moving towards having annual food fairs where they promote diversity and traditional foods. A number of food outlets are now being supported to bring in diversity in our food systems. So that's to encourage farmers to grow these crops within their farming systems. And then we've had some universities that have been able to incorporate courses on climate change and biodiversity. One of them is what we are doing right now, and that is very, very impressive. So what can be done better? We need to do more of the enabling environment. We need to reinvent indigenous traditional knowledge systems. We need to enhance and support the use of multiple species within our farming systems. Then there is need to have more enhanced investment in renewable energy so that the use of charcoal and firewood can go down. Then there is need to have incentives to adoption of regenerative agricultural practices. And then lastly, building capacities to collect and analyze climate change related models such as early warning systems, response model, vulnerability assessment, which are things that are lacking. So if there is something, it finds most of us out unprepared, and the effects are always devastating. So these are some of the key references of what I've been talking about, but there's still a lot out there that you can go read and add to this that we've talked about. So thank you so much. Over to you, Sam.
Wonderful. I'm looking for the reactions. At the lack of it, allow me to just give a round of applause on behalf of all members. Yes, I can see applause coming to you, Dr. Beatrice, and you've done very well. You've paced yourself with 1 minute to spare. So members, ladies and gentlemen, kindly, thank you. Give a round of applause and some stars to Dr. Beatrice coming your way. Again, colleagues, members, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sam Wanjohi, Country Manager, Africa One Health University Network, that is AFROHUN, Kenya. I will be moderating this session, including the Q&A. And my reason for saying that is to remind you to put your questions using the Q&A function. So kindly have your questions ready, type them out in the Q&A function, and we will take them through and have our presenters going through. Again, Dr. Beatrice, thank you for an amazing presentation. Whereas the picture is grim, if we continue doing business as usual, you have gone ahead and offered some solutions and some hope at the end. And so, we may not get to 2090, but at least we know we can start we can start changing the picture right now. So thank you so much. Members, ladies and gentlemen, we want to proceed to our next presenter. having heard that amazing lecture from Dr. Beatrice, we now want to invite Guigma to make his presentation. He's going to take us through a case study for the next 10 minutes. Guigma, it is 10 minutes to the top of the hour. And at, at the top of the hour, 6 or rather in Kenya or 5 p.m. in South Africa time, the top of the hour will be adjourning your session before we proceed to the next one. Guigma, you have the floor. Kindly proceed with the presentation and welcome.
Hi, all. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. So I'm going to present on anticipating climate-induced food prices through anticipatory humanitarian action. First of all, just a quick reminder of how climate change and food insecurity or food security are interplaying with each other. We know that climate change can affect food production. I can give a quick example. When it's flooding, for example, this is going to affect the crop yield, and at the end of the day, the small-scale farmer will not be able to get anything at the end of the season, so they will fall in food insecurity. Just an example. We also have climate change affecting, of course, the climate-sensitive livelihoods as well as the supply chain. From Burkina Faso, for example, and I know that recently, because of floods, one of the main national roads, that is the roads linking up the two capital cities of the country, was cut off by the rains. So basically, as a result, this will affect the transport of goods, including food, to the people in need of it. So as a result, this can be an impact of climate change on food availability or in the increase of food prices, leading to food insecurity for the most vulnerable or for the most food insecure communities. We also have, of course, food quality and safety because of drought or because of floods, because of extreme heat. We can have the multiplication of waterborne diseases affecting the quality of our food. And of course, all of these combined will lead to food and nutrition security. But of course, the other way around is also possible. The production of food, or let's say all of the activities leading to food security, can contribute also to climate change. We know that agriculture, for example, is one of the sectors that is contributing the most to greenhouse gas emissions. So this will have some feedback on climate change. This said, to face that, and knowing that climate change is something that is predictable, or at least at the shorter time scales, when we consider weather and seasonal time scales, we know that this is something much more predictable. In the humanitarian sector, we felt that it might be better to try to anticipate food crises instead of responding to them. It is very good when there is, I don't know, a flood and people have lost the crops, to go and distribute some cash or some food. This is very good, but it is better if we could anticipate that. If before the occurrence of floods, we could already distribute let's say, for example, flood-tolerant seeds, so that people can still manage to harvest something at the end of the season. So with this in mind, humanitarians came with what they called the anticipatory humanitarian action, or simply anticipatory action, shortened AA. What is it? So it is a new mechanism in the humanitarian sector that allows humanitarians to trigger funding in advance of a disaster, of a predicted disaster. To illustrate this is the slide I have. So before, how we used to do things is, we know that a climate shock is going to happen, a drought, a flood, a heat wave, or something like that is going to happen. We don't do much, we just sit and wait until it happens before we start to run everywhere to just get the funds to respond to what has occurred. So if people have already caught some, if there is, I don't know, an epidemic outbreak, malaria or cholera outbreaks, for example, this will mean that people that have already died won't be even, let's say, affected by the responses that we are going to provide. So the response is, of course, very good, but it's not really the solution to everything. And so they decided, humanitarians, to come up with anticipatory action. So what they do in anticipatory action is, as soon as they receive the information that a major climate crisis is happening, a flood, a drought, a heat wave, cold wave, or any other heat-related, any other climate-related disaster is happening, and between this the issuance of this alert and the actual occurrence of the disaster, they will take action based on the triggering of funding that will allow them to take action so that the most vulnerable communities are protected. Because of course, ultimately, the objective of the humanitarians is to protect the most vulnerable communities. So I'm going to give the main components of this anticipatory action. So it's mainly 3 of them. So first of all, the emission of the forecast, so the alerting agency, and in this case, for most African countries, it's going to be the National Meteorological or Hydrological Service, and then the set of actions that people need to take. So basically, pre-identified action. It's not after we have received the alert that we need to start thinking about the kind of actions we are going to implement. No, we decide together of what actions we're going to take with the potential donors, with the potentially affected communities before we even receive the alert, so that when the alerts are sent out, it is something kind of more automated. It is easier for the humanitarians to take action. And of course, the third and one of the most important components is the finance, because it's important to have the actions. It's important to receive the early warning, but unless you have enough resources, enough money to take action, this is not going to come into practice. So one quick example, first of all, is the case of Niger. Niger is a country in West Africa which is quite vulnerable to drought. So the Niger Red Cross has developed a drought anticipatory action plan. And how does it consist of? As early as May, the rainy season in Niger lasts roughly from June to September, October. So as early as May, when there is an indication that there is going to be a drought in the country, there are going to be a number of actions taken by the National Red Cross Society of Niger. And these will target both livestock farmers. The actions for livestock farmers are those that we have in blue, as well as crop farmers. And these are those that we have in green. So for livestock farmers, for example, they will do some sensitizations. They will recommend farmers to store fodder. They will do the vaccination of the livestock, the cattle, etc. They will distribute some vitamins as well as reinforce pest control. For the crop farmers, they are going to distribute drought-tolerant seed that will ensure that even if there is a drought at the end of the season, they will manage to harvest enough to sustain themselves until the next rainy season. Because as you may know, in West Africa or in the Sahel, we only have one rainfall season. And as a result, if you miss out on this one, you need to wait until the next one to be able to farm again. So this is a concrete example that the Niger Red Cross is giving. And of course, being able to harvest despite the drought will allow the communities to not be in food insecurity and therefore not in malnutrition, with all the subsequent advantages that this have in terms of, for example, preventing school dropouts and related things. The second example is from Kenya. And here I'm going to talk about the Kitui County. For those that know a bit Kenya, it is a semi-arid land in eastern Kenya. So in 2015, they received, the National Red Cross Society of Kenya received the information that there is going to be El Nino. El Nino is a climate phenomenon which is associated with heavy rainfall in Kenya, particularly in this semi-arid place. And this typically leads to crop losses as well as the outbreak of several diseases. So when in 2015, the National Red Cross Society of Kenya received that information, what they did was to, with the support of the IFRC, the International Federation of the Red Cross, to provide some hybrid maize seeds that are tolerant to both dry spells, but also floods, or if you want, heavy rains, to a lot of farmers in the Kitui County. And each farmer received a total of 2 kg pack of seeds ahead of the rainy season. And these hybrid seeds, as I said, are healthier and suitable to the specific climate or microclimate of the Kitui County. So the National Society's volunteer distributed the seeds to a total of 21,000 households, and many of them were also trained on how to store maize and also better or climate smart practices. And of course, this at the end of the season allowed to have a relatively good harvesting despite the heavy rains that the county has received. And the harvested maize served the household pays for the school fees. I was giving the example of school dropout, for example, in India. So school dropout didn't occur because they had the possibility to pay for the school fees as well as cover the medical expenses and other household items. So all in all, it was a good use of the scientific information about this climate phenomenon called El Nino that led to a surplus of food after the harvest instead of the usual shortages. Thank you very much.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. A round of applause to Guigma for the wonderful presentation. He had 10 minutes to share the case study, and I think he's done justice. That has been quite a presentation. So thank you, Guigma, for that. Again, members, ladies and gentlemen, kindly let's give some applause to Guigma and some flowers and some celebration in the chat. My name is Sam Wanjohi, Country Manager, the Africa One Health University Network, AFROHUN Kenya. I am your moderator, and I'll be moderating the Q&A session as well. And I wish to invite you to send in your questions using the Q&A function. And you can do that as we invite now our final presenter, John Otieno, to share his case study. John, you have 10 minutes. It's 2 minutes past the hour, and you have the floor. John, over to you.
Thank you so much. My name is John, and I would like to take you through a case study for Somalia. I wanted to confirm if my slides can be up and running. Sam?
Are you sharing? Are you sharing your slides?
Not really.
Do you want me to? All right, there they are.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
So just to give a quick background, thanks to the previous speakers, and just wanted to link this discussion today based on what Dr. Beatrice has presented, and of course, Guga that highlights quite a number of issues that are linked to climate. My presentation will be focusing on a case scenario in terms of health response because of climate-induced challenges. And the case study is from Somalia, just to give a quick background. Next, please. So just to give a context of what Somalia has in terms of malnutrition and challenges that they have really been facing since the 2022 drought. You'll see the next slide, the numbers are really, so just to give a perspective. So in Somalia, the humanitarian context has a very multiple challenges. Number one, we have over 1.2 million people who were displaced in 2022 due to drought. And of course, you're aware about the conflict situation that has been spiraling more often than not. And of course, it's unpredictable because certain pockets experience armed conflict, others because of drought. And so these challenges really brought a lot of issues about access to health services. And more than 1.8 million children suffer acute malnutrition. That, of course, includes children. Includes a number of children who are over 500,000 who are severely malnourished. And can you imagine that we have about 4 in 100 Somali children die during the first month of life, and 8 in 100 before their first birthday. And interestingly, we also have 1 in 8 that do not turn, do not see their 5th birthday. Of course, this is really mind-boggling. And if you look at the numbers as well, like I mentioned, we had a 5 failed rains in Somalia, which really pushed numbers. And if you look at the malnutrition classification, they were at a very critical stage of more than 15% in terms of GAM rates. And the comparison between 2017 drought and 2022 really shows a very serious, an increase in terms of numbers. And we were able to tabulate the numbers from all the admissions that we had, and especially because we had serious displacements. Remember, when there's drought, people tend to move from where they, from their homes, looking for pasture, looking for food. And when they move in between, the ecosystem on health access becomes a challenge. And so we had a significant number of people who were driven because of, who were displaced because of drought. And if you see the next slide, Somalia, so this is just an overall overview in terms of the location. We say Somalia is based in the Horn and East Africa. And in terms of, again, humanitarian challenges, we have fragmented donor support, which of course, most of the time, when there's an emergency, it takes long for people to respond, especially on the donor approvals, getting budgets, accessing humanitarian funds, and this sometimes reduces the turnaround time for response. We also have some parts that are because of insecurity. We have non-state actors who have been causing a lot of havoc within those locations. Then we also experienced cholera and measles, and of course those locations that I've listed really experienced a lot of challenges, issues about diarrhea, acute respiratory tract infections of over 15%. And then malaria, and of course, due to diarrhea because of a lack of access to water, people tend to take water from unsafe or unsafe, drink unsafe water or access water from open places. And the next slide will show you how some of the this is just gives you an overview of the Somalia context. Now, interestingly, we have the health system, and it's been they have both the national, state level, regional, and some of the working groups that exist. We have maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. For those who are in the nutrition space, we have IMAM and the other technical working groups. And this dashboard just shows how a chronological numbers over time, because these are real-time data. So looking at the number of children who are reached within Somalia, beyond just action against hunger response within Somalia region. And in the next slide, I would like to share with you. So in terms of our presence, and just to give you an overview of some of the response plans that we did based on the numbers that I've shared with you. So Action Against Hunger has been in existence in Somalia since 1992. And we've also have staff, national staff who are employed through one of our projects, World Bank projects. And we have about 96 national staff, 7 international staff, and of course, terms of male, female. And from Ministry of Health, we have about 1,000 staffs who are also employed that we support in those places. But I would like to pull your attention towards the map that is at the on my right side, where if you look at Mogadishu, Jowar, and so much of the location. So Hudur had the most worst hit, the green part. Most of the interventions that we did around that time were around Hudur, and a lot of influx. We had more than 5 IDP camps, and each IDP camps, based on the numbers, we could only host about maybe 100,000 people or more, between 100,000 and 200,000. But then issues about numbers, insurgency, insecurity, access to these locations was also a very big challenge. Then in terms of partners that we work with, just to give you an overview, we also drive local partners who can access the locations that are sometimes being controlled by the insurgents. And so we work with the local partners in those locations. Next, please. Now, so a case scenario, just a quick one. So if you look at 2021 and 2022, 2022 is the orange one. We had over, you could see for every month, the number of admissions that, are coming in. So children who are being admitted into the nutrition stabilization centers, we had an increase of over 45%, which was the highest record compared to 2021 and 2022. And then between January to May 2022 and 2023, we had, of course, an increased 10%. So you could see that the admissions, once they increase, it means there are certain outcomes. So either children who will stay longer, children who will either die because of other underlying conditions, and children who will have relapse cases. So they keep on going home and then they come back. Next. Great. So so that was the first one. And then in terms of outpatient therapeutic admissions, you can see that Somalia was worst hit based on the GAM rates that I had shared with you in the previous slide. We had about an increase of 105% of admissions in comparison between 2021 to 2022 across all the sites. And then we also had, in terms of admissions, so outpatient therapeutic admissions increased up to between 2022 and 2023, we had a 24% increase. This just shows you how drought or displacement really caused a lot of challenges in Somalia. Next. And then the last one, because this is targeted supplementary feeding program, is also very important because sometimes because of unpredictable numbers, influx of women, pregnant women, and malnourished children who are moving, we also decided to do check on the hotspots and ensure that they're able to receive nutrition services around those locations. And you can see how the percentages increased between 2022. Between 2021 and 2022, and then we also had 2022, 2023, which was of course 37% increase in terms of those who are accessing, the admissions in terms of numbers. Then the last one that I wanted to share with you, next please. Yeah, so with all the numbers that I've shared, and of course, time is not on my side, but I just want to take you through some of the interventions. And of course, we don't work in isolation. We work with the Ministry of Health and of course with the other line ministries. So in an emergency situation or in a humanitarian situation, we have different avenues for intervention. So number one is looking at high energy biscuits that was supported through by good support from UNICEF. And then we also had vitamin A supplementation, deworming, we know because how this can exacerbate some of the conditions. And then the fresh food vouchers that were distributed, promoting emergency maternal, infant, and young child nutrition sessions. And of course, doing WASH, water hygiene and sanitation, food security and livelihoods, and then building resilient programs. Then the last one that I want to take you through, that just to give you a case scenario, is that in terms of immunization, which is very important, and we have in Somalia, we have a campaign through one of the projects. We were able to target children under the age of 5 to ensure that immunization does not stop. We continue to do sporadic checks, so screening for malnutrition and ensuring that we do what is called timed and targeted screening, and of course real-time admissions to ensure that we do not lose any children in between. And now on my last segment of my presentation, I want to take you through the last. Go to the next one because of time. Yes, so this is one of the areas that I also wanted to really dive into. During that time, we had a cholera outbreak in Hudur district, which I had mentioned before. And community health workers have really been our strong supporters, ensuring that they're able to do mapping, do referrals. They're able to also manage, using the the drugs and the commodities that they have at at community level. And we saw quite a number of, especially during cholera outbreak, we had reduced fertility of, the number of children who died. In terms of within those 3 months, we didn't have any death cases recorded. And we had about, 2,398 beneficiaries or people that we work with within the communities. And then the last segment that I wanted to present to you is the lessons that we were able to learn, challenges and the lessons that we were able to learn. We saw an increase access constraints due to insecurity. By the way, in one of the locations we had our commodities being, we had a raid by insurgents, and they took everything and also abducted 3 of our health workers, and they took almost 3 months in Ethiopia before coming back. And you can see how the disruption being caused by climate and then induced by another insecurity issues is multi-pronged, and it becomes really difficult. Then most of the main internally displaced person settlements across Somalia are also private land, which are controlled. So before you access, you have to talk to the community and the gatekeepers, who sometimes demand for money or a lot of, they want support or services, which sometimes may not be, we are not able to achieve within that short time. Then we also had resource strains because of increased number of people in the camps. And of course, the last one that I wanted to mention is the insufficient access to clean water. Imagine a health facility without clean or access to water. Issues about, cleaning of the area and ensuring that the facility is clean, ready for service or support becomes a challenge. And then last one that I wanted to share with you in conclusion is that we were able to look at, based on our experience in Somalia during the drought period, we had lots of lessons learned. So first is that first response activation by NGOs is possible and life-saving. And of course, scalability is very important, because sometimes you find the number of people displaced, they don't stay in one place for a long time. Once they get the services, they will move, because they are also moving with their animals into those camps. So here you have people who are also concerned and really concerned about their animals vis-a-vis, continuity of health services. Then community health workers play a pivotal role in terms of building a very robust healthcare system, and issues about, ensuring that in terms of reporting, follow-up, monitoring, and sometimes they're also giving us updates where we have insurgencies like, Al-Shabaab will be an imminent attack by Al-Shabaab, then they will tell us in time, and then we will see how to do some, housekeeping measures and ensure that security is updated. Then, of course, we also learned that timely preposition of medical, nutrition, and wash supplies is very crucial, because you never know when emergencies may occur. And then, like I told you, we also work with local organization because there are certain places that are hard to reach. And because of the insecurity situation, it is not easy to really access some of these locations. So they help us issues about communicating within the local language, MIYCN messages that are being spread or shared within the communities becomes much more easier because we are working with the local partners. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, John, for the wonderful presentation. Again, members, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause to John, who was our final presenter for today. He was rushing against time, and he was racing against time. He had a lot of information, like we could tell, but then it had to be compressed in such a short time. And so, John, we appreciate you. We also want to appreciate Dr. Beatrice. We want to appreciate Guigma for the wonderful presentations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are 11 minutes to when we are supposed to adjourn. We have an array of questions, and I want to applaud each and every one of us for sending through these questions. I note we are almost 2,000 participants, and so if each and every one of us was to send a question, I think we'd be here till next week. And so with that, I think allow me to just filter, I think 2 per presenter, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, two questions per presenter. And then I believe the course organizers will try and get the remaining questions to the presenters and have them answer, and then feedback would be given or responses would be given back to the participants, the course participants. So to Dr. Beatrice, I'll give you 2 questions. You will answer. I'll move on to Guigma, 2 questions, and then I'll move on to John. So here we go, Dr. Beatrice. How do we address the issue of food insecurity by taking into consideration climate change? Again, how do we address the issue of food security by taking into consideration climate change? For example, genetically modified seeds have been adopted which are only grown for 1 season in preference to the indigenous seeds, which could be planted for more than 1 season and at times more resistant to drought, pests, and diseases. That's question number 1. Question number 2 for you. Prof. Ekesa, please comment on the genetically modified crops with regard to food security and nutrition. Do you think they will increase food security since they are early maturing? Dr. Beatrice, over to you. In a minute or 2, your responses.
Yes, thank you, Sam. You've just chosen the very sensitive questions. Oh my God. Okay. No, I'll say what is possible. So first of all, thank you for the questions, and thank you, course participants. We hope we'll get an opportunity to also looking at what we are not able to respond to now. So going to the first question, how do we address the issue of food security by taking into consideration climate change? And you're talking about things. I think the first thing that we have to look at is policy advocacy. You know, if we can be able to sell the idea and convince our decision makers and policy makers on the effect of climate change, then, you know, because people listen so much to our policy makers and our politicians, they are the ones who are making these decisions on what is really actually being decided for us. So if we can enhance us as practitioners, us as researchers, development agencies, enhance our relationship with the policy makers so that they are with us as we measure, as we assess, and as we come up with magnitude of the consequences of climate change, then they can be able to change their narrative when they're in their closed doors discussing some of these agendas. So I think is engaging some of these, we call them the movers and the shakers of what we are doing in our discussion. And that is why there is a lot of moving forward participatory and inclusive research and development action. So I am thinking we have tried to do that within the CGR and within other international development agencies, but even at country programs, let us make sure that when we start working on some of these interventions, or when we start collecting data, we make some of these policy makers and policy influencers part of the process. When we make them part of the process, they will see the problem, they will see the magnitude, and they will realize this is actually dangerous. Then they can change the discussions that happen in closed doors where some of us are not there. So policy advocacy and engagement would be one strategy that we should try to incorporate in our day-to-day activities, both government sector, research, development agencies. So if we can focus on that, then we can change what is actually happening. Because we do a lot of work out there. We come up with results, but then these results are not adequately taken up, understood, and they don't form part of people who make the big decisions. So that is what I would say would be one thing that we could really put in a lot of effort in. Then the other question was on genetically modified commodities with regards to food security. I defined what food security is. And I talked about quality, quantity, safety, and nutrition. So this is a very contentious issue, but what I would say is that it depends on actually what you're going for as a community. Are you looking at the quantity or the quality? But if we talk about actually food security, some of the genetically food will meet depending on what you're looking at. If it is the quantity, if you're in Kenya, you've not eaten ugali, if you want maize that produces big maize stalks, you will go for that. But then, as you said, you grow them for one season, then you have to still buy seed for the next season. So I think it is us to come up with more evidence on whether these varieties that we are advocating for, whether genetically modified, whether indigenous, how can they be sustained and come up with a clear projection and narrative that can be shared with the people who make the decision on using genetically modified food. So I wouldn't say whether they are the best, but I know they contribute.
Wonderful.
Yes,
wonderful.
They contribute to food security. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Beatrice, for very, well navigating through those questions very well, and offering your insights into those. Now, I have two questions for Guigma. Now, Guigma, how can humanitarian action be reimagined to enhance problem solving and impact? Again, how can humanitarian action be reimagined to enhance problem solving and impact? And the second question, what steps can be taken to transform Africa into a global hub for food production? Kindly try and use some 2 minutes to answer those ones so that then we can spare some time for John as well.
Thank you very much. I think to the first question, to the first question, I would say that it is very important for the humanitarian sector to also take advantage of the new tools that we are having today. Nowadays, we have a lot of IT, we have a lot of artificial intelligence and things like that. So it is quite important that the humanitarian sector also try to get into innovation. This is very important if we really want to make more impact. You see that more and more, you see lots of drones, for example, delivering food items and things, something similar. So it is very important for us, the humanitarian sector, to try and get into the innovation. And another thing I would say is also try to, let's say, have, as a bit what Dr. Ekesa was saying, a bit of a stronger policy around humanitarian work. You see, most of the humanitarian interventions are done in emergency situations, but they are not often associated with a good or a strong policy background. So it might be important also to reinforce that. The second point, which is, I think, a more political question, how we can do, what we can do to make Africa a I think for us to become a great food hub for the world, it is, again, first of all, being able to master our development. The development in Africa, and this is not just for the agricultural sector, it is very, very shock sensitive. So any external shock that is happening elsewhere around the world is first of all going to impact Africa. We have seen that with all of the economic crisis. We have recently seen the Ukraine and Russia war that has affected Africa quite a lot. So it is very important for us in Africa to try and see how we can, first of all, enhance our collaboration across the different regions in Africa. We have, for example, Central Africa, which is quite good in terms of rainfall, receiving quite a lot of rainfall, and therefore being able to produce quite a lot of crops. We have other regions, for example, the semi-arid regions of East Africa or the Sahel, that can be good in terms of multiplying the livestock production. So all of this is possible. We just need to have these different connections. And then there is this, there is also the need to take advantage of science. So with climate change, we always talk about climate change as a negative thing, but we are seeing a lot of floods, for example, happening at the moment in West Africa. It also happens in Eastern Africa. In Southern Africa, it is drought. So when we take floods, for example, if we have a good water management strategy, we'll be able to store this water and use it later for food production. So a good use of science is definitely going to help us in Africa improve our agricultural systems. And the last point is, of course, to have the youth take the lead, or rather to contribute significantly to all the decision-making processes, because ultimately tomorrow they are the ones that are going to be impacted. Thank you.
Wonderful. We are at time, but I want John to answer one question. This discussion is obviously amazing, but John, we are at time, but allow me to just have you answer this in 1 minute. How do you engage the local communities in governance of your programs? This is to enhance sustainability of your programs, and basically, how do you integrate humanitarian and development efforts? In a minute, how do you engage local communities in governance for your programs?
Great. That's a very, very interesting question. So the how is, like you saw from from the slides that I presented, is that we work with local organizations that are already established, that are registered, that are, already being, we'll say, managed within the confines of Somalia, NGO management. And that we work with them closely, especially when we are doing baseline surveys, carrying out midterm reviews, doing community feedbacks. And of course, they are the ones who now host dialogue sessions. And one thing I wanted to mention, Sam, is that we currently work with other partners on the HDP. Now, humanitarian and development were being run, at different levels, but the peace bit of it has been missing out. Now, Somalia is a very interesting context. It has both climate and conflict. So sometimes you may respond from a humanitarian approach, during an emergency. So during the drought, we are giving non-food items, providing shelter, vaccinating animals, but then it goes beyond that. So issues about building resilience, and we've closely worked with government and local communities to ensure that they understand the intersectionality between conflict and how that is also pushing climate issues. And my last point that I wanted to mention is that we work with communities currently to also start looking at what is called citizen anticipatory watch, so anticipatory action watch. So we work with them, and we've been, an interesting bit as I conclude, was one day we went to the field and we were asking the communities, now that the drought we have had failed rains for the last 5 years, they use the traditional one. So they tell you, when we see birds moving from Hudur, to this other side, then we know that it's going to be a dry season. They already have something that they're talking about. So the conventional one. And then lastly, they will tell you, the old people will say, when we hear our bones cracking, then we know that it's not going, the rains are coming. And so we've been able to work closely with communities. And I know today was just more of an introductory, but we have interesting insights about community engagement. We also have community health volunteers who are also part of our, participating in our internship programs. So we band them into internship programs, and they're the ones now who are working as community health assistants. And it becomes much more easier because they already learn, they learn what we do, and then they continue to implement. I submit.
Wonderful, wonderful. A round of applause to all our presenters. They have a lot of information. They have a wealth of information, ladies and gentlemen. But because of the limited time that we have, I think we will beg to adjourn at this point in time. My apologies. We are 4 minutes past the hour. But like we said, we shall be looking at sharing the, all right, let me see, sharing the questions with the facilitators, with the presenters, so that then they can be able to respond and look at modalities of having the questions back to you, so that then you can be able to have your responses. We want to take this opportunity to thank you for being with us. We are still at well above 1,500 participants, and that is an indication of how engaging or interesting this session has been. We want to give a request that you kindly go through the chat. There is a link to the session survey, the post-session survey, or you can quickly just do a screenshot of the QR code and kindly share your feedback with us. The feedback would be important for us to improve the next session, to, look at the areas where we can tie up any loose ends that we need to address, even as we improve the next sessions moving forward. Remember, this was the session 7 of 11, and so we would wish to continually improve. So we kindly request that you take a moment to take a grab of the QR code, or go to the link that has been posted in the chat, and share with us your feedback. You're also invited to join the WhatsApp group for any updates and information from the course planning team, which would be important for you. We've seen questions coming through on when the exam will be, and so on and so forth. And so it will be important for you to join the WhatsApp group to get those updates. Again, we want to appreciate each and every one of us, each and every one of you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking time to participate in this session 7 of this course. It wouldn't have been possible without you. I mean, if you did not join, then Dr. Beatrice, Guigma, and John will be speaking to, I think, me and my fellow facilitators. But because you made time to join this session, then it has been a success because of you. Our appreciations to Dr. Beatrice again, Guigma, and John, for taking time to prepare the information that they have. They were excellent, presentations, and for taking time to share their expertise with us. We also want to appreciate the course planning team that you can't see behind the scenes, for just making sure that everything is flowing smoothly. I believe it is now some 6 minutes past the top of the hour. We want to appreciate you as we adjourn this session today, for taking the time from wherever you're joining us from, whether it is in the evening, in the afternoon, or in the morning. We are glad that you made time to be with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next sessions. And with that, we want to say thank you, merci beaucoup, obrigado, and till next time, I think we will stand adjourned. Thank you once again. We will try and ensure that the responses are captured to the vast array of questions that have been put forward. From me, Sam Wanjohi, the Country Manager, Africa One Health University Network, Kenya Country Office, I want to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to be your moderator for this session today. With that, allow me to say au revoir, and I think we'd stand adjourned. Thank you.